Once upon a time, in a faraway land.
What are fairy stories?
The strange and wondrous place where nothing is as it seems.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest?
Fairy is a perilous land.
Before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep well.
It is the place you visit
A world
in your
of
dreams.
myth and magic.
When the clock began to
The
chime
evening
midnight,
star sailed down through the
A
sky.
mysterious voice began calling to the sad
She
princess.
pricked her finger with her needle. 3 drops of blood fell on the
In a
small
trance,
white
she
finger.
followed the haunting
And peered
sound
into
of
the
a
hollow
winding
tree.
stairway to the top of the
You
tower.
can read along with me in your book.
she waved her wand and said the magic words.
Let's begin now.
Well met, witches, and welcome back to Storybook Sacred Lore of Witchcraft. Today we welcome 2 new guests to the circle, Nay Noordsmans and Victoria Raschke. Nay, how would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Aaron. My name is Nay Noordsmans. I am a folk witch residing in Southern California. My practice is basically, very, very much land-based, very ancestral. My family comes from the northern Netherlands and these islands off the coast of Denmark and Germany. So a lot of the content that I put out there is very much informed by that, and also very much by my love of gnomes. If you follow me at House of Gnomi, you'll find all of my writings, all of my research. I have some more things hopefully slated for this year, but that's primarily where you can find me and kind of follow what I do.
And what type of magical or spiritual practice do you follow?
Just kind of a hodgepodge of different folk magic traditions. It's funny, I grew up in Southern California, so I was very much immersed in all of the New Age, basically every New Age trend you could possibly see or participate in. And I also grew up just a stone's throw away from Theosophical Society in Southern California. So I also had, that influence as well. Even though I don't necessarily consider myself a Theosophist, they have really some library. So if you're in Southern California, check it out.
Yeah, so I'm from Chicago, and there's the Theosophical Publishing House is there in I believe it's Elgin, and also the library. So it was a little bit over an hour hike, but I would drive out occasionally and became a member of the library. And then, as I was telling you, I had a short stint in SoCal as well, and I was down the street from that Theosophical mansion, and I kept it was just such a shock to me because I was so sad. Like, it was one of the last places I visited in Illinois before I left, and I couldn't believe that there was that there was a center there. And then COVID happened, so yeah, it wasn't open. I was never able to go, but that's amazing. That you were able to be there. I'm sorry to jump in with that, but I haven't heard anybody mention the California location before. Mm-hmm. And we also have with us Victoria. Hi, Victoria. How would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi. Usually for the podcast, I say, I'm Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio, also podcaster, obviously. So I am also in California, but I'm in Northern California, closer to the Rosicrucian Museum than the Theosophical Society with the other giant Egyptian collection. Yeah. And like Nay, my family is mostly Nordic, German and Swedish, German, obviously, with a last name like Raschke, and then English on my mom's side. So same kind of general area, but I grew up in East Tennessee, and so there's a lot of Appalachian stuff on my mom's side.
Oh my goodness. And I don't believe you said, but Victoria, you are the host of WitchLit Podcast,
yes.
Right?
So yes, I am the host of WitchLit Podcast, and I interview occult authors of fiction and nonfiction every week. We're on a little bit of a break as we record this. And then I'm also a writer. I write fiction about witches, and I have a new book that just came out in November called Verona Green, which is the name of a paint pigment, if people are wondering. And it's about a witch who can time travel and channel by touching paintings. And so there's a lot of intrigue and art world stuff that happens.
That's incredible. And Victoria, are you yourself practicing? Do you have a magical or spiritual practice that you'd share?
I do. I am initiate of the Forest Edge tradition. And
yes.
I would say that's kind of folkloric, traditional witchcraft, kind of a blend of those things. I have a lot of Appalachian stuff in my practice. Like I said, my family's, from East Tennessee on my mom's side. And then I also, because I just read a lot, have like an interest in grimoire magic. I don't do a whole lot of it, but I study a lot of it and I guess pull things in from that too. So mostly I'm a book nerd. I mean, honestly. So.
Yeah, I can understand that. That's fascinating. So, Victoria, you actually suggested today's topic, which is Gnomes by Wil Huygen. And I was not familiar with this book, and luckily I was able to find a copy at my local library. So I've been perusing it the past few weeks. What inspired you to suggest this title?
So when you asked about books, like I thought of a few, and then I thought of this one specifically. I got it for Christmas in 1978. Not this copy I have. The one I have, unfortunately, that I got for Christmas, lost in one of the 30-something moves in my life. But I think the thing about this book and getting it, like, not actually too long after it came out in the US in English, actually, it just like dropped me into this world because it's written, for people who haven't read the book, it's written like a biology book or like a textbook of these gnomes. And the illustrations are beautiful, just stunningly beautiful. And as a kid, like illustration was really the thing that I was drawn to in books. Like one of my other favorite children's books is Miss Susie, which is about a squirrel that lives in a tree and winds up living in a dollhouse. So these little worlds things just fascinate me. And it was like the borrowers, all of those kind of stories when I was a kid. But I think the gnomes really stuck with me partly because, though we were disconnected from my German and Swedish family when I was a kid, like I always knew that about myself and was always drawn to those things. And there's a lot of that kind of Northern European stuff in the story of the gnomes. Really, I mean, it's just one of those books that even as an adult, you can just like curl up with a cup of tea and just lose yourself in the images. Like it's just such a beautiful little world that these two lovely men put together for us. So.
And Nay, how did this book come into your awareness, or what's your history with it?
Oh my God. Honestly, I don't really remember. I remember having it as a kid, but I don't remember, what Christmas or birthday it arrived into my life. Gnomes have always been part of my consciousness and honestly, part of my spiritual path. My great grandmother, she used to take me by the hand whenever I came to visit her, and she would take me into the garden, and I would have to pay my respect to the little man who lived in her garden. And of course, it was a little garden gnome. But the thing is he was never called a gnome. He was never called a kabouter. He was never called a nirmenchi, which is like one of the Frisian words for gnomes. He was always the little man. So it was this really beautiful kind of introduction into the syncretism that's taken place with these figures of folklore and folk magic. That this idea from the old world was here in the new. And my great grandmother was an incredibly religious woman. So to think that this kind of, they get branded as pagan spirits, but this old world idea was there in her garden. This was a really beautiful concept.
And something that seems special about this title is that it was published originally in the Netherlands. Like, these are Dutch authors and artists, so we're getting a slice of I would assume, the accurate folklore, or their interpretation of the accurate folklore before it was translated into English. Is that accurate?
Somewhat.
Okay. Please. That's what we're here for.
So this book is really interesting because it kind of coincides with all this major environmentalist movement in the Netherlands, where they were kind of rejecting certain I don't want to say certain aspects of modernity, but it was like, okay, cars are great, but we're not going to have cities built around cars. We're going to keep our walkable cities. We're going to make it more bike friendly, which is why the Netherlands is such a wonderful place to visit. As long as you don't get hit by a bicycle, right? And the two of them, I believe, had been friends. They were part of this this mindful hunting group. So they had this kind of idea in mind that, we have to preserve the woods, we have to preserve nature. So it kind of reflects that, definitely preserving nature, preserving or having these spirits that are involved with the preservation of nature. But I don't believe that either one of them really were gnome believers. There are some things that run counter to a lot of the Kabouter folklore, but it's still such a wonderful and whimsical book, and really, got across what was intended, which is, that there's beauty and whimsy all around us.
I guess I'd like to push that a little further than things that run counter to older folklore. Is it in their mostly friendly disposition that they're portrayed within this book, or what are some aspects that stick out to you?
Well, it depends. So generally, Kabouters tend to be friendly, but they can get angry just like any other spirit. There's also some parts, for example, there's the assertion that gnomes come from Scandinavia, and trust me, I love the Tomti, I love the Tomtu, I love the Nisa, but it kind of takes away from the beauty of these spirits, and that the tradition of these little men of earthly magic are found all across the world. They didn't just originate in one place, and that phenomena is something that kind of brings us all together.
Mm-hmm. Something that I noticed in my brief introduction to it is that there are different areas represented in some of the legends. So in Netherlands, of course, Norway is mentioned, but then even Moscow and I think Poland and Siberia for some of them. And I was really surprised by the broad reach that the legends are set in. How do you think this influenced both of yours, progress as you grew into more of a magical mindset or magical practice?
Yeah, I think for a long time, when I kind of came to witchcraft, they call late teenage years, or when I was in college, so 17, 18. And I think one of the things about that is when I came to it, I already kind of had this love of what I guess you would call cottagecore. So what we would call cottagecore now, I guess we didn't call it that in the early 90s, but
you were just ahead of the time.
Yeah, I was just a little bit ahead of that. But I also was a goth girl in high school. So it's goth cottagecore, right? But I think this book and always kept me drawn because there's a lot of herbalism in this book. But it's not 100% accurate stuff, but it's there.
Well, it's herbalism for gnomes.
Right. Herbalism for gnomes, not humans necessarily. But so I think that really was probably the biggest influence on it, is that idea of because, I grew up out in the country in East Tennessee, so I was steeped in kind of, the magic of the dogwood tree in our yard and all that, the magic you have as a kid just inherently in the world when kids still got to grow up outside, So I think that had a lot to do with it. And it just does, it's just one of those things that stayed with me as an adult, in my magic practice and that. And I've written about this, and then I'm not a Slavic descent, but I did a year abroad in Slovenia when I was in college. And so got kind of steeped in Slavic tradition and folklore. And so, they have the domovoi, which is similar kind of thing. Although in Slovenian, they're described as the size of a cat and completely covered with hair. So they're really different kind of than what gnomes look like. And so I think I've always just been that idea of the spirit of a house of a building and like who's lived there before. So there's also like kind of that ancestral practice and all of that comes in, I think, because of that.
Did you make a point to like leave out a bowl of porridge or anything?
I did when I was a kid, definitely. And it was always kind of more around Christmas, I think, which comes with that, kind of how Tomta and Nisse are kind of more Christmas things now, I guess in modern practice. So I think that was probably why it was mostly around Christmas. And now, like, I've lived a lot in apartments as an adult and then individual houses. And I've lived in houses where I'm sure there's some kind of house spirit. And then I've lived in houses where I think somebody pissed them off and they left because they were not pleasant houses to live in.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And same for you, Nate. How do you think this book, if it did play a part in the development of your magical mindset and your magical practice?
Yeah, I think it kind of reinforced all of the things that I was inheriting just through the folklore that was handed down. I already kind of had this mindset of that, the kabouters are all around. I heard one of the stories that I loved were the stories of King Kiri. He was a gnome king down in the southern Netherlands who was actually a victim of gun violence. He was accidentally shot by a hunter. And that's actually what made the kabouters of that region leave. And they actually went north to Scandinavia. That's what they say. And there's actually like all of these like actual eyewitness accounts of people watching the kabouters leave on basically a kabouter road. So yeah, it's just something that reinforced my belief. And yeah, that happened, or there was something similar to it that happened that kind of took the magic away in a certain way. It dimmed our worldview that everything around us is alive and has a spirit to interact with.
And you talked a little bit about where this came from in its native Netherlands. What do you think has been the impact culturally in the US when it was translated and published here?
It's definitely shaped the way we view gnomes in popular culture. There have been, depictions of gnomes and gnome statues all throughout the world. Going back to the Tomte, one of the things to honor your Tomte was to carve out a Tomte Besar. We see that with the kobold as well. There's always different little stone figurines generally, or wooden figures that people would use to kind of the place where you would go to talk to the kobold. And I believe that's also where the folks in the UK actually started bringing gnomes over. There were a couple of very eccentric noblemen who bought all of these little terracotta gnomes and started putting them in their gardens, and so that was one of the very early origins of garden gnome. But it didn't really take off in the United States until the publication of this, unless you were like my great-grandmother and you brought them over.
And maybe we should actually jump back a minute. Like, how would you define a gnome? Like both of you. Like to you, what is the gnomes that are we talking about?
I feel like Nay is the expert here, but I will say, like, for me, I always think of gnomes as like nature spirit, like kind of related to the Fae, maybe. And like when you're thinking about them specifically as like a house spirit, I've always thought of them as ancestral. Like, and I think that is somewhat traditional depending on which type of gnome you're talking about. Is that sometimes they're either like the first person who built that house, or like the spirit, like kind of this ancestral spirit that then guards the property. I think that for me, I don't think they have to wear red conical hats, but it's probably easier to see them if they have one on and they don't get shot by hunters.
Yeah.
There's a great line in one of the legends in the book where it says a girl wants to make a statue of the gnome and she paints the hat blue. Incorrectly, of course. But the gnomes don't mind. They're flattered by it. And yeah, Nay. So what what are gnomes for listeners who are unfamiliar?
Well, I mean, it's a very loaded question, right?
Sure.
Personally, for me, I always go back. I go back to the origin of the word, and we don't really get gnome until Paracelsus.
Right.
Paracelsus wrote, the 4 treatises on, the sylphs, salamanders, pygmies, and he was basically using gnomi as just kind of a synonym for pygmy. Pygmies being the little folks that lived around the Mediterranean. I believe they either appear in either Homer or Ovid. They're these little folks who have this seasonal war with cranes, crane birds.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I love that too. And he basically defines them as these beings where Earth is basically their chaos. That is the element that they live in. That's the element that they thrive in. And the thing that also sets them apart from the other elementals is that they are endeared to man. So they want to be in right relation with us as long as we're in right relation with them. And household spirits in particular, you find this additional benevolence because you're sharing the same space. As Victoria was talking about, sometimes they're very associated with the very first ancestor or the very first person who tilled up soil. They could also just be in the house because they were living in the tree that was felled so that they could build the house. There's a lot of different ways to get a household gnome spirit. And then, of course, there's these spirits that are really gnomes. They're small in stature. They've usually got the hat or something, another identifier, maybe a beard. But they are more focused on the genus loci, or they're a reflection of the world around them because, there are forest gnomes, there are beach gnomes, there are mountain gnomes, you name it.
I'm so glad you brought up the origin because that was actually going to be one of my questions is, do we think the gnomes as portrayed in the book, how related are they to the Paracelsian or later neo-pagan concept of the earth elemental gnome? There definitely seems to be some conflict in the way they're described in some parts of the book, but yeah, how much do you think they are the same or similar or overlap or not at all?
I think there is probably a little bit of overlap, but I think really they kind of take on their own thing. But that's kind of my estimation. Like I said, I feel like I'm an admirer and Nay is the academic here. This was an influential source book for you. So, I'm curious how it, how you view it and how it influenced you. Yeah. Yeah. Once being exposed, I think, to more Paracelsus and, that kind of stuff, I don't think they're reflective that much of them. I think they kind of have their own space separately from that, the way they're portrayed in the book anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Any further thoughts on that, Nay, or not so much?
They're definitely not reflecting the, what Paracelsus had to say.
Right.
They are reflecting, some of the more, I guess you'd say early modern stories about kabouters, in certain ways, especially the forest kabouters, who tend to be pretty nice and amenable. But Victoria's definitely right. It goes on a very different path. It's interesting how this book was written because they weren't starting with the stories themselves. Rien Poortvliet would basically make the paintings or the drawings, and then Wil Huygen would actually then start writing. So it's a book that's very much informed by the imagery, not necessarily what we would consider the source material of the stories themselves.
Right, not illustrations of the text in that order. When I think of the Paracelsian elementals, this is what I want to imagine as a gnome, or the idea I want to envision as a gnome. But I think the biggest conflict that jumped out for me, just going through this is the elementals in the Paracelsian sense are not physical necessarily, and they are composed entirely of that element. And whereas the little friendly beings here are very physical, they can be seen and they milk cows and things like that, and so therefore probably have as much much of a mixed construction as we do. Like they are sort of like your grandmother said, a little man. But I think you bring up a good point in that because this was about kabouters and not specifically the earth elemental gnome, I suppose, as it was written. But yeah, this is exactly what I like to envision if I'm invoking earth and the earth elementals.
Yeah, I was thinking about like how this book influenced, like Nay said, about like the pop culture, I guess, idea of gnomes, like your garden gnome thing, or like the David the Gnome kind of stuff. Like it really was influential in that. And while I was kind of like, just cruising around preparing to talk about this, I had forgotten, because I had seen this as somewhere else, that weirdly Martha Stewart's ex-husband is the person who got this book published in the US.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so there again, to my cottagecore reference.
There's the cottagecore.
But he kind of fought for it because they thought it was kind of silly and it wouldn't sell, and then it wound up being this huge bestseller. So
this
we
is
have
my new
Andy
favorite.
Stewart to thank for the gnomes being translated into English.
This is my new favorite piece of trivia. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I wonder if she loved it, or if she, rolled her eyes at his silly endeavors or something.
Now I kind of want to ask Martha what she thought about it when he published it. I don't know if she likes to talk about her ex-husband. So,
do you remember any favorite parts or passages from the book? Like any favorite sections?
I love the section where they talk about their clothes and have like the little drawings of like what they wear. Like I can't.
It's almost like one of those dress up, like those paper cutout dress ups.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I did. So my mom was an artist, and she made me a little paper doll based on those drawings. So I had like a little paper doll she just kind of traced for me, and so I just like that. I think that I've always just like that little. And I sew. I used to sew a lot more, so I think there was a drawing to that. But I love all of the ones too that are kind of toward the end where they're helping the animals, like where they do acupuncture on the animals. Which I'm trying to think like how acupuncture got in a book about gnomes. But I also love those, like just all of these ones with like helping the deer with the wire trapped in its antlers and all those drawings. I just think are really sweet. It's interesting. I did not know that about that the drawings came first and then he kind of wrote to them. I think that makes it really interesting to think about like how he decided what to draw if he wasn't drawing to kind of what what they thought was going to happen. But there's one, this image, let me see if I can find the page. Mine doesn't have page numbers on all the page.
No, they don't.
But it's kind of in that same section, but it's one of the deer with like the little gnome walking away. I would love to have this one like on my wall in my office. Like there's something about that image, especially like how tiny he is in that whole, like the whole composition of that one is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Like the deer at night in the snow at the troughs, the little gnome walking away, this little red hat, like really the only point of color in the whole illustration.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're just beautiful. They're just beautiful.
And it's incredible. These are completely watercolor.
And I love on the cover where it says, he seems to be frowning, but this is caused by posing in harsh daylight. And that's just such the magic of the book, right? That at no point does in the book itself, do they give the game away. That they don't really believe this. Like the book never gives that game away.
Nay, are there any parts that stick out in your memory?
Yeah, definitely. There's one section where It's this beautiful drawing of this landscape, but there's nothing really going on. And the writers say, if you can spot a doe in this landscape, then you have really good vision as a human. But here's what the gnomes see. And then you turn the page and it's this beautiful snowscape, and there's all these little lines like, oh, here's where the badgers are. A doe just ran across the snow just a few minutes ago. What a magical worldview, right? At seeing the world, not just as, a beautiful foliage, but also seeing, the remnants of the other living creatures around us and being more in tune with that.
Yeah, I love that.
Something I really appreciate about this, I think, goes along with how you said this was like a radical ecological influence, or had a radical ecological influence, but how symbiotic the gnomes work with the other animals. And so like how you mentioned, Victoria, how it shows them treating the animals, but even besides that, like they live with field mice, and the best friend is some kind of mole, and that it shows them riding on the geese's back at some point, and how ideological that is, and speaks to like the current push for some of us to try to reclaim not only an animistic mindset or worldview, but like a cooperative and collaborative existence with the nature around us, and how it exemplifies that through the gnomes. Yeah, it's really lovely. What do you think someone who wants to build a new relationship with gnomes could pick up from the book on how to start that? Maybe how to make offerings, or how to look for them.
Nay, do you want to start that?
Sure. Well, first of all, you don't necessarily want to go looking for gnomes. They don't like people who are nosy, and that's also something that you see in Kabouter folklore. It's very similar to some of the folklore around brownies as well. You're never supposed to spy on them, ever. That's how you get, poked in the eye. If you're peeking through a keyhole or around a door. They like their privacy. That doesn't necessarily mean that they won't reveal themselves at different times. These are spirits with their own agency. But it's important not to, do any magical workings or try to, see them when they don't want to be seen. But in terms of, offerings, they get into kind of the things that they like. There's that entire like breakfast menu of, what do the gnomes eat for breakfast? And of course, porridge is one of those things. And porridge is the thing that we see most often throughout different cultures as a consistent offering for gnome spirits. So, like I always say, just like leave out a bowl of porridge and then just notice what happens. How does the space feel? How do you feel in your body? That's one way to go about it.
Yeah. And I think when I was researching the domovoi, like the more Slavic kind of, like they would do like fava beans, so like a peas porridge kind of thing for them too. So I think we, at least in the United States, we always think of porridge just like oatmeal or grits or something like that. But also like peas porridge was a thing too, fava beans and stuff.
Interesting.
So I always think about those too, like just what they would like. But yeah, I think for me, like usually, like now when I move into a new house, I always kind of just listen, don't look for them, but just kind of listen to feel like if there's something already taking care of the house, and make friends with that, either by leaving something out or not getting in their way, making sure like we kind of bless the doors, that kind of stuff. But, my current house is in Silicon Valley and it feels weird to think about, but I don't think it's unusual to think about every building having some kind of spirit, whether it's a gnome or a domovoi or, whatever it is. I think, if you're an animist, everything has a spirit, right? So I don't know that I need to see it to feel that.
Victoria, I'm curious, because you mentioned growing up in East Tennessee and being connected to the natural surroundings there. how was the change when you move across the country, like feeling like trying to connect to the natural surroundings around you or the spirits around you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm like in year 3 of living in California.
Oh, it's recent.
Yeah, it's pretty recent. So it still feels really, I still feel really disconnected in a lot of ways. When we first moved here, we also lived in an apartment complex, in like a huge apartment complex, really in like the heart of Silicon Valley, and everything felt like a movie set and not real. So now that we're in a house, we're like in an older house in an older neighborhood, and I have a yard again, which is really nice. So I feel like it's a little easier to connect, but it's still like, and I think the thing about growing up in Appalachia is that those mountains are ancient, like just incredibly ancient and worn down, and like every hollow, or holler, if you want to be really specific in Southern, has this kind of like shadow to it. There's always like a little bit of like kind of spooky magic about Appalachia in a lot of ways. And everything here feels raw instead of worn down, I guess, in a way. I think it's being really close to the Pacific, and the mountains here are very different. And I think that part has been really strange to connect. Like I'm grateful that I have mountains still, because that would be weird. I don't think I could ever live anywhere really, really flat. I think it's crazy. I was thinking about it for me, like really flat places. I think something like a giant bird is going to pluck me into the sky. Like I just don't feel protected in the way I feel when there's mountains. I don't know why. So that part's been good, but yeah, it's been a weird transition, because it does feel very different. Like the land is very different here than in East Tennessee. It's a very different place.
Yeah, I was telling Nay before you logged in, I'm in Texas now, but I'm from the Midwest, Chicago, and same. It's beautiful, actually. Like the trees and things here are beautiful, but it definitely feels completely different. The ecology is totally different here. And I spent a short time in Southern California, and it was weird. Like in Chicago, there are like bird sanctuaries and nature preserves and things like that. So we could get to the woods at night to do things. But after relocating to California for a short time, I realized how tame and safe those Midwest, especially like in the middle of the city, Midwest forests were. Whereas there were forests, really small ones, but there were like I could visit the Los Angeles forest, but there's like bears there and wildcats, and like people were, attacked by wildcats while they're hiking during the day, let alone at night, and it made me just think like how radical wild witchcraft can be, and it was scary. Mm-hmm. And the woods here
is like that too. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
And mountain lions. Well, not mountain lions, but bobcats.
Yeah, bobcats. Yeah, of course. And mountain ranges in general have their own dangers. But yeah, and here they're not as there are bobcats here, but the woods don't feel as dangerous, but they do feel very different. Like it's hard. It feels hard building or just different trying to build a relationship in a new place.
Are you from Southern California, Nay?
I am, yes. Yeah, I was born and raised in Southern California. So basically, I know the woods that Aaron is talking about quite well. And then, of course, you get into the Chaparral area, and then you got to worry about rattlesnakes. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah, there are snakes here too, but I think are worse there.
Is it Palomar? What is the observatory that's close to San Diego? I can't remember what the name of it is. It's like up on the mountain.
In Los Angeles, there's Griffith Observatory, but by San Diego, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's not in use anymore. It's a museum now, but I can't remember what. I think it's Palomar, but I would not swear to that. But my aunt and uncle took me because my aunt and uncle lived in San Diego when I was younger. And that was the thing I remember about going up there is they had a huge sign that said, "Do not stray from the path because there are snakes." And I was like, what like that seems more than just a warning. That seems like, a motto. So, but yeah, the snakes, the California snakes are serious too.
Even some of the spiders there, honestly, like when you're hiking, there's even like dangerous spiders there.
Yeah.
Something that caught my attention towards the back of the book too is there's music. We have gnome and troll songs, which I suppose could be an interesting offering if people were inclined for the gnomes. But funny enough, one of them appears to be the song that they play when they're on the toilet, which is so funny. But yeah, there's sheet music for a Do Not Disturb song. Nate, what inspired you to progress your online presence into specifically about gnomes?
I don't know. I think it was just I'd been posting every once in a while about like really niche kind of kabouter folklore. I think I wrote about the smeltjes of a particular island in the Netherlands, and the little man of Willemstad, which is this little, it's amazing. It's a little tiny wooden figurine that was unearthed during the building of the Delta Work in the Netherlands. And this thing is like 6,000 years old, and it was intentionally placed between the roots of I believe it was an oak tree facing north, which is like obviously intentionally placed. And he's called the Little Man of Willemstad, and it's kind of, he's considered a gnome. So I think I posted about that, and then I think I just got the idea, like, it was Christmas last year. I wasn't really doing a whole lot, so I thought, okay, I'm going to do 31 nights of gnomes with gnomes from all around the world. And then, that a lot of people really liked it. A lot of people really appreciated it. I kept getting stories, and also I was helping people because it was like, hey, I had this weird cat, and it wasn't like any other cat, okay? Like, this cat defied physics. It would turn around a corner, and it would just disappear. And I've had cats before, and this wasn't it. And, I just gave it an offering, and I think I have a Domovoy now. It's like, yeah. So it's been a really fun to hear people incorporating this into their lives, and also, having good results.
Do either of you follow, or are either of you familiar with the Modern Fairy Sighting podcast? There was episodes recently, I believe, about people sharing their stories of modern gnome sightings as well. So that might be something you'd be interested in. It's a UK podcast where she collects stories of people who believe they came in contact with fairies in the wild at some point in their life. And I think one of the recent episodes was about gnome sightings. Have they played a part in any of your fictitious works, Victoria?
The Domovoy, yes. There is, in the first series of books I wrote, they're set in Slovenia. And so at one point there is some trouble with a Domovoy who gets angry because they realize that there is something else there trying to hurt the family that lives in the house, and they're upset about it. And so they get upset and also do hurtful things. Because one of the things that, in doing the research about that I was really fascinated with, is if they get angry, they'll carry coals from the stove, because Slovenian houses are built around these really beautiful tile kind of, we would call them a stove, but they're huge, and they're like, they have benches is where they would put babies when they were newborn to keep them warm. Or like sometimes the elderly people in the family would even sleep on this big, beautiful tiled stove. And some friends of mine live in a house that has one of those, like about 150-year-old house that has one. And so I'd been around them. And so one of the things when they would get angry, they would carry coals into the rafter to burn the house down if you made them really angry. And so that's kind of one of the things that they talk about in the book. So that's, I haven't written about them here, funnily enough. Or my new series is set in the US, and I haven't written about the first one. There are spirits abound, but not gnomes yet. So
do either of you have any like any final thoughts or things that you wanted to talk about that we did not get to over the course of the discussion?
Gnomes are awesome, and you should live in right relation with them. You don't have to have a household spirit, but I certainly recommend it.
I would second that. I think Nay's Nay's got it there. So yeah, I think it's I don't know. I think it's also good for me. I mean, especially this book, and like I think one of the things about this book, and just thinking about like how like its presence in my life now, is I think it captures that magic of childhood when you are first exposed to those things and how big the world still feels, and and how it's so much easier to believe when you're a kid, and maybe capturing some of that as an adult, not a bad thing.
Yes, thank you for bringing it back to the book. And in fact, one of the goals of the discussions here are to remind us or inspire us to look at the world around us with wonder. And so I often like to end with, until we next gather, may all your travels be filled with wonder. Thank you. I should ask, do you have upcoming classes, teachings, professional releases? I know, Victoria, you have current releases that you'd like to remind everybody about?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, the book came out in November, so it's available. You can get it from 1000 Volt Press, and I'll even sign a copy for you if you order it directly from 1000voltpress.com. And then I also host Witchlit, and I interview an author every week. And then for special episodes, we do a Witchlit Classic book, where we talk about a book by an author who has to be dead. That's the only rule.
Oh, very cool. I didn't know about those episodes.
Yeah, so they usually come out like on the Wheel of the Year days. So
okay,
I'll give you a little teaser for In Bulk. We're talking about Rachel Pollack's book, Godmother Night. So.
Very nice. And Nay, are you going to be giving any talks again coming up?
No, not this year so far. I'm hoping to do something in the summer, but we'll see what happens. But I've done some previous courses with the Salem Witchcraft and Folklore Festival. I did a class on the magic of the Low Countries, and then I did another class actually just dedicated to Gnome. So that's why I might stray a little bit off topic away from the book, because it's a subject matter I adore.
And I think you can purchase those old episodes. I think you can purchase those from Cauldron Black, or you can, if you are cued in and want to listen to Nay's talks. And I got to see, I think, one or both of them, and they're fantastic. So,
thank you so much.
Recommend.
Perfect. So they are still available for attendance, pre-recorded.
Yep. And if anyone wants the slides, just let me know.
I'll probably hit you up for that. Thank you so much for your time and your generous knowledge, for being here today. Once again, until we next meet, may all your travels be filled with wonder and hopefully some generous, friendly gnomes.